Our next presenter is Mr. Thomas Riddell Graham. He is responsible for managing Visit Scotland's partnership and visitor services activity. The former covers a wide range of external partners and stakeholders at national, regional and local level. The visitor services function provides information and inspiration to visitors and is delivered on a face-to-face basis from 84 locations throughout Scotland to over 3.5 million customers annually. His team is responsible for the direct delivery of Visit Scotland's quality assurance schemes and the provision of advice and support to businesses. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Graham, who will talk about Scotland's National Tourism Development Framework.
Thank you and greetings from Scotland. I am delighted to be here at your 2015 conference, but I'm also disappointed. Disappointed not to be asked what is worn under the kilt. And of course the answer is there is nothing worn under the kilt. It is all in perfect working order. And I have an advantage because when the gents' toilet is full, I can go to the ladies as well. I promise before today I had never met Michael, the earlier speaker in my life, but it was very interesting how much what he said I will repeat in a slightly different way from his presentation this morning. And just to reassure him, we are about to launch a new brand for Visit Scotland that doesn't mention tartan, doesn't mention bagpipes, and doesn't mention golf, but talks about the people of Scotland, the spirit of Scotland. He also mentioned the diaspora, and we have a very important event that happens every 3 or 4 years called Homecoming, where we attract people who have a Scottish connection back to the country. And last year, the event was a huge success, lasting end to end throughout the year. And I also have to say something about first impressions, and maybe you hadn't thought about this, but my first impression, apart from the pouring rain when I arrived last night, was delivered by the taxi driver, who was an ex-fisherman and who talked in fluent English to me all the way and told me all about the things to see and do. So your people are very, very important. Again, just to stress what Michael said earlier on. And so to my presentation. And that picture is taken from a place called Stornoway in one of our islands off the west coast of Scotland. I thought I would start with a quick comparison between Scotland and Iceland. And as you can see, Scotland is much smaller in terms of the size, the area, but has 14 times more people. We are pretty heavily populated, just over 5 million people. And tourism is very important to the Scottish economy. 10% of our total GDP and 10% of all employment. So it is Scotland's most important industry, if you add the jobs and the spend together. But it's also important to note that despite what you would expect, the most important visitors to Scotland are from the United Kingdom. 82% of our visitors come from UK, with only 18 from overseas. But look at the spend. The overseas visitor obviously spends an awful lot more when they're there. And our core markets, I mentioned the UK, but North America and Germany and France being the significant core markets that we will try and attract. And a bit about our strategic approach to tourism and to tourism development, and it's based around those 3 words, the drivers, the enablers, and the building blocks. And the building blocks are all about the things that you have to get right. The infrastructure, the skills, the transport, the accommodation, the connectivity, the accessibility, and they have to be there on the base, otherwise it won't work. The enablers, things like taxation, visas, collaboration, business-friendly legislation, very important to enable tourism to develop effectively. And then at the top, the drivers, marketing, disagreeing with Michael there, quality, sustainability, and the brand. And in addition, our Scottish Government, our economic plan for Scotland talks about the 4 I's. They talk about investment in the product and in skills. They talk about internationalisation. We are not particularly good when it comes to internationalisation in Scotland. They talk about inclusive growth, which is about social inclusion, social equity, and also about innovation. And again, we lag behind the rest of the world when it comes to that. So what does that mean for planning and tourism planning? Well, we have a national planning policy and a national planning framework. The 2 documents have been in existence for some time now. And the reason I put 2010 to 2014, if you had looked at those documents over that period, they do not mention tourism at all. Tourism is not mentioned at all in either of those 2 documents, which means we miss out. And so my board said we must do something about this. We must start to influence the national planning policy for Scotland. And interestingly again, and it's picking up Michael's point, in Visit Scotland we don't talk about tourism. We talk about the visitor economy. And yes, right in the centre are the obvious parts of tourism, accommodation, attractions, events, travel, retail. But then round about, all the industries that rely on tourism or that tourism relies upon. And one of the biggest players in Scottish tourism is a company that washes all the laundry for the hotels throughout the country. Now, they would never think that they were part of the tourism industry, but if there were no visitors, that company would cease to exist. And they now recognise that they are part of this much wider visitor economy. We talk a lot about the customer journey, and in developing the plan, we use the customer journey as the basis of it. So people, and you will have seen this many times, I'm sure, they look in a whole range of different places. When I first started in tourism almost 40 years ago, they only looked in one place, which was the tourist board. We were the only show in town. But now they look in many other sources for information. They book, and they can book through a whole range of opportunities. They travel to the destination, they stay in accommodation that suits their pocket. And then, of course, when they get back, they tell people about the experience and the whole idea of keeping in touch. And so, using that basis, we have developed the plan, and we received great support from our national partners that look after different parts of this customer journey. The Historic Scotland, the people that look after our historic properties, the natural people, the people that look after our environment, the Transport Scotland people, and our economic development agencies. So it was very much a joined up approach in developing it. And although I didn't understand a word that the Minister was saying this morning, I got the impression that that is the new approach here as well, to move out of the silos and work across, which is really good to hear. We have 34 planning authorities in Scotland. We're a tiny country, but for some reason people feel that they need to plan us out of existence. So we have 32 councils, all with a planning function, and we have 2 national parks that also have a planning function. And when we suggested we were going to lead on a tourism development framework involving planning, we got a very negative response from the councils because they said, butt out. It's not your job. You're a marketing agency. You shouldn't be involved in this. This is our job. And I was told that we would not get support from any of them. And as soon as somebody says to me, you will not get, I will try my hardest to ensure that they're wrong. And sure enough, we got a response from all 34 councils eventually. And we engaged with them and explained what we were trying to do, and they bought into it, and they are now ambassadors for the plan. We were also lucky in that we had a national tourism strategy. We call it the Rocket. It was developed by the industry, for the industry, 1,700 responses from industry people and community organisations. And I don't expect you to read all the details, but there is a line there which talks about providing authentic experiences, turning assets into experiences. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with the plan. There are loads of assets, but they need to be brought alive by the people working in them. And that discussion this morning around intellectual property, my belief is, sits with the people, the taxi driver who told me all about the journey as I drove here last night. I put that slide up not because I want you to read it all, just to show that things are complex. I have to deal with all of these people on a day-to-day basis. We have over 2,500 relationships that we have to manage. And some of them are more important than others, but every one of those blobs on that map, they think they're very important, and we need to make them feel important and get them engaged in this process. So it's about being inclusive and not excluding anyone, bringing people along with you rather than fighting against. So what was the tourism development framework all about? It was about providing guidance to development planning authorities to help secure growth in the visitor economy. Very simple. Trying to influence what was happening throughout the country, but on a joined-up basis. And lo and behold, in 2014, last year, 3 months after we published the Tourism Development Framework, a new national planning framework and Scottish planning policy was published. And for the first time ever, tourism and the visitor economy is mentioned in both those documents. And that is very, very important because it means that all local planning authorities must take into account tourism and the visitor economy when they make their decisions. So instead of saying, no, we are controlling development, they must see the economic benefit argument and the sustainability argument in terms of jobs when they make that decision. And sure enough, some examples, some of these already have tourism and the visitor economy included for the first time ever in their decision-making process. So that's fine. We have a document, we have loads of documents, so what? What we were really keen to do was to capture what was going on in Scotland. There was a lot happening in tourism development. And so we created an action plan. And the action plan, and this really astonished me, 640 projects happening throughout the whole of Scotland, £10.1 billion worth of investment in a 3-year period, starting or completing during the period of the plan. Things like infrastructure, digital infrastructure, Wi-Fi, broadband, new attractions. That really strange circular object is a 5-star hotel located right in the centre of Edinburgh. And the train is very important to me because I live south of Edinburgh, the only place in Scotland that didn't have a railway connection. And this, after £340 million worth of investment, was the new railway arriving into my hometown. And all the people that said it wouldn't work, we've already had in the first month 125,000 people use it, to the extent that people are having to stand all the way to Edinburgh because the trains are so busy. So examples of tourism development happening, all of them benefiting the local community as well as the visitor. But again, that's fine. So what, I hear you say. I have a sign on my wall in my office that says, so what? And I have a drawer full of strategies and policies. So what? Let's see how these actually have turned into real projects on the ground. This is an example of us working with the Forestry Commission, who look after our forest estate. And the mountain up on the right-hand side is the tallest mountain in the whole of the United Kingdom, Ben Nevis. And it has a ski resort attached to it, and a town just down the road that has some pretty old, dated accommodation. And the Forestry Commission felt that they needed to create new accommodation that was relevant to the people using it, to attract new visitors. And so they carried out a massive master planning exercise involving the community, involving local tourism businesses, to develop the kind of facility you see, which is about to be developed within the forest, taking account of local needs. This would not have happened without our involvement at national level in painting the national picture. And a rather unusual one, off our coast in the Outer Hebrides, again, tourism very important, but very seasonal, maybe only a 12 to 14 week season. It has pretty good accommodation for self-catering, but it hasn't got very much to see when you're there. And this new building, just opened about 4 weeks ago, is a distillery, but it's a distillery with a difference. It has a social conscience. All the people that work there are from the locality. It uses local base material to produce an amazing gin, and also 5 years down the line, an even more amazing whiskey. And it is located as you come off the ferry, as you arrive into the Outer Hebrides, something that will get people to stop and spend. And all the materials used there are local, and all the menus and everything are focused around local food and local produce. So very unique way of developing tourism in a very fragile part of Scotland with a very strong community focus. And my final example is one which came out of a really bad situation. You will have heard, no doubt, about foot and mouth disease. That happened in Scotland, in the UK in 2001. And the area that was most affected was the area that I live in the south of Scotland. And nothing could happen. All the events that were organised in the countryside were closed down, and you could not access the countryside apart from in the forest, because it was controlled. And suddenly the Forestry Commission, who thought they were all about growing trees, suddenly realised that they had a very important role in tourism. And so now, 2015, this forest has got accommodation that is unique and is very eco-friendly. It has a world-famous downhill mountain biking centre. It has facilities for walking, for disabled people and for able-bodied. And it has this really scary outdoor activity centre called Go Ape, where people far braver than I will walk about in trees 60 foot up in the air. All of that came on the back of a disaster called foot and mouth disease, when people that didn't feel they were part of the visitor economy suddenly realized they had a really important role to play, and our tourism development framework enabled that to happen. I would like you all to stand up. And I'd like you all to point to north. Point to north, where you think north is. Okay, you can sit down. I suppose that was just to get you moving again after your lunch. I suppose where we are with the tourism development framework is we know where we are, we're here. The challenge now is where do we want to go? And it's quite interesting because if I was to follow you, we would be all over the place. And I think what we now need to do is decide where we want to get to. Where is north? And so it's about mapping the supply, and I got the impression that you're well ahead on that, which is great. We've mapped our supply. But what we need to do now is overlay demand. Where are the visitors to Scotland coming from in the future? Will they be Chinese? Will they be more Americans? Will they be Germans? What kind of accommodation will they be looking for? What transport will they be using? What will they want to do? And do we have it all in the right place, of the right quality, of the right size? And a really good example, we're under a lot of pressure to develop activities for the Chinese market. The market that we would be attracting is the luxury end, and they will only stay in 5-star accommodation. We don't have enough 5-star hotel bed spaces in Scotland to accommodate them. So there is an example of what we will be doing next: mapping supply, overlaying demand, identifying the gaps, and then trying to fill them on a joint basis with our partner agencies. And that's going to be a really exciting next step. My final slide, I was asked to just give a view on destinations. There used to be 14 local destination organisations in Scotland. And I used to work for one. I was the chief executive of one in the south. And the government of the day decided that they would abolish them. Political decision. Whether it was right or wrong, they are no longer. As soon as you create a vacuum, it is filled. We, up until a couple of months ago, had 300 different local destination groups, all vying to be the best, all with their own website, all saying that they were organising events, all saying they were attracting visitors that other people weren't. We deal with around 20 of them, the 20 that happen to have some money and some people. But it's my experience, despite what we were told by countless consultants, that not one of them is sustainable without public money as a destination organisation. And please note, I don't talk about management or marketing, I talk about a destination, because they all do different things. All of them have tried to be sustainable in terms of their finances with industry money, and not one of them has succeeded. And I am not aware, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a model that exists without public funding, and we need to recognise that. We work very closely with them, particularly these ones. It's quite interesting, the Glasgow one, please note what they say. Glasgow's not about the architecture or the infrastructure, it's about the people. And if you've been to Glasgow, you'll know exactly what that means. I think there's an interesting challenge there in terms of working at local level to create the right kind of experience for a customer. And I finish with that slide because, you know something, no matter how many consultants you hear, how many academics you hear, how many people from the tourist board you hear, I still believe the wording on that slide. And it's good to know that there are some mysteries that will never ever be solved by us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. And now, like before, we have time for some questions from the audience. So please let me know if you have any questions. You're not that tired after lunch, are you? Well, I'll have to start again. I'm interested in what you said about the small agencies around Scotland and how you work together with them. That is the big agency, Visit Scotland. How do you work together and how closely?
We're lucky in that there is an umbrella organisation called the Scottish Tourism Alliance that brings them all together. Because the alternative would be we would have to speak to every individual one and communicate with every individual one. So we tend to channel it through the Scottish Tourism Alliance or to organisations that are properly resourced, that have people and funding to make a difference. So, for instance, our new marketing director and our new approach to digital is all focused on content. And we recognised, based in Edinburgh, that we don't have all the content that is needed to populate the website in terms of images or stories to tell. And so we're relying on local destination groups to provide us with the content, which we can then put out to a much bigger and wider audience. So we work with them where they can add value and where we can add value, or where we want to communicate an issue and get feedback. And that works pretty well, but if I was to shade in a map of Scotland, there are gaps in the map, which is not good.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, my name is Elias. I'm coming from the Icelandic Tourist Board. Can you elaborate a bit about the tourist information centers, the local ones, and how you're involved with them, how they are funded, etc.?
Yeah. Visit Scotland historically did not run information centres at all. They were all run by this network at local level. But when the network was abolished, Visit Scotland inherited 120 properties and 600 staff. So they had a very small staff, and then suddenly they had a huge staff. And to be honest, they didn't know what to do. And so we've looked at where they are now, and they're funded partly by us and partly by the local council. And what we're trying to do is move the historical allocation of facilities to where visitors are. So our new strategy will be, we'll have far fewer centres that will be funded entirely by us. We'll work in partnership with other bodies that have a visitor attraction. This is a brilliant example of a model we would want to follow, where this facility will attract visitors and there's a tourist office. But we will also be working with the industry itself, the hotels, the bed and breakfasts, the self-caterers, who should be doing a job, and some of them do it very well. So we will have a three-tier approach, but the funding for the main centres will come from us on an ongoing basis. There was someone.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Björn Johansson, landscape architect, formerly with the Tourist Board. And thank you so much for your talk. It was really impressive, and I'm always really, when I've looked at how you reach into work with the planning authorities, I think it's really great. One of my main jobs at the Tourist Board was managing a fund that's both a conservation and development fund. And I'm really interested in both the distillery and the other projects that are obviously private enterprises.
Yep.
What is the role of the public funding? How much public funding is in there? How is it a grant? How is it developed? And can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. We have an economic development agency, but as with everything, instead of having one, we have two. We have one that covers the south, which is Scottish Enterprise, and one that covers the Highlands and Islands Enterprise. And that distillery was in the Highlands. And they have a social remit to help community development. So in that project cost £10 million.
Was that the distillery or?
The distillery. And Highlands and Islands put in £3 million in terms of a grant towards that, but they can also provide source funding. They can provide a loan. They will look at the business case. How many jobs are created? How is it impacting on the local community? What are the wider benefits? It ties in here with food and drink, which is very important. So they would take all that into account and they would make that decision. So in that case, yeah, quite a lot of public money went in. In the hotel in the centre of Edinburgh, no money at all. All private equity, major developer, and then a very large hotel development company coming in to run it there afterwards. So it varies. But some of the smaller, the forestry one, funded as a base by the Forestry Commission, but then private equity coming in, the Go Ape private company who developed that facility. So a real mix depending on the location and the benefit to the local community.
Any other questions? Last chance. No. I would like to ask Michael Hall to come up here again and Ólöf Ýr. She has some surprise in the schedule today for us.
Michael's here, actually.
I'm afraid Michael hasn't returned. He scampered off so quickly that we didn't manage to thank him. And I just wanted to thank you for your presentation on behalf of the Icelandic Tourist Board and give you a small token of our appreciation. Thank you so much for coming.